All right, welcome. James Pittman here, co-founder of DocketWise, and this is the webinar on running an employment-based immigration practice. And I have with me two immigration lawyers who specialize in the employment-based area. I have Ron Matten and I have Samir Kedekar, and they will be my guests for today. So I want to introduce them to you guys. Can you introduce yourselves? Ron, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your background? How did you get into this area of the law? Why did you choose it, and what's your practice like?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here. So I actually studied engineering, industrial engineering as an undergrad, and worked for about 6 years doing manufacturing processes, and then decided I wanted to help people. And so I went to law school, and I was very interested in immigration. Little did I know that having that sort of process background was going to be really critical for being successful as a business immigration lawyer. I worked for many years, I'll skip some details, but I worked for many years at law firms connected with the big four accounting firms based in Toronto. And that was where I really got to see some of the very high volume corporate accounts. I left there a few years ago to start my own firm, and sort of transitioned from more of the conventional big corporate H-1B perm green card accounts to more of, I would say, entrepreneurs, startups, even performers and musicians. And so I've really focused on trying to bring what I saw as good on the big corporate side to help the smaller corporate clients as well as the individuals.
Mm-hmm. And how about your current practice? What is that like?
Yeah, so the current practice is like I said, it's primarily focused on entrepreneurs, startup founders, performers, musicians. We do a lot of O1 visas, but we also still do quite a bit of the corporate H-1Bs, perms, green cards. But it's, I would say, 90+% employment-based immigration. And then, of course, the sort of odd family-based case that is easier to do than, I mean, not easier, and what I mean is the finish line is more clear versus sometimes in the business context.
Absolutely. Is it, I mean, how many attorneys do you have on staff right now? Is it,
right now it's just myself and one other.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. So there you go. There's our first point, is you can actually do it with just one or two attorneys in the firm. That's, you don't have to be in a big firm. Let's give Samir a chance. Samir, please tell us about your background.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I fell into immigration law at a law school. I mean, I did have my own kind of unusual immigration experience. My mom and dad were living in LA, and then my mom flew back to India to have me, and then flew back when I was 6 weeks old. So I had a green card for several years, and they kept misspelling my name on the green card, and I kept trying to figure out, as a young teen, how to kind of correct that error. And I was like, this is just crazy. It was so difficult for me, but I felt like, this desire to help others kind of navigate through this process that I just had so much difficulty getting through. And then, of course, I promptly forgot about that experience, went to law school, and then ended up falling into immigration law with a very small kind of multi-practice immigration firm in San Francisco. They did, employment, but they did family. They also had a kind of a thriving asylum practice, and really enjoyed that experience. Chose that job because I liked the partner who owned the firm. The associate who was there just started, and he's still my best friend. He's now a USCIS supervisor. And so it was a really good experience. I found through that experience that I really gravitated towards employment. I did some asylum work and some family-based work, but really, really enjoyed the employment part. Not just the practice of it, but kind of like the business development aspect, talking to clients, getting them to sign up when they walked in the door, that kind of stuff. So I worked for that firm and another small firm in San Francisco for about a few years or so, and then I joined Pro Law Group in San Francisco in about 2006, and that was 15, 16 years ago. And that was a huge shock, as Pro had really large clients, high volume clients, very different than kind of like the onesie-twosies that I used to deal with before. So it was a total culture shock. I felt like I was learning a new area of law almost, just because of the vocabulary was different, like the processes were different, the considerations, like the things that we were expected to mind were totally different. And so that was quite the learning curve for a few years. At that point, we were about 3 attorneys and 25 staff. And then, by the time I left in 2018, we were at over 30 attorneys. So we helped grow it like big time. 30 attorneys, over 100 staff, 3 continents, had a thriving global immigration practice as well. So that was an incredibly like awesome experience, dealing kind of, with the ins and outs of like high volume corporate immigration. As I left, I was a managing partner when I left, and great leadership experience, kind of learning both like the business development aspect, but also the kind of like the firm management aspect and how to hire, how to manage people, like, lots of different challenges there that I really, really loved. And then 2018, I left to start my own firm, Banyan, which I'm with now. We're just 30 miles south of San Francisco here in Palo Alto, California, and I'm loving it. So just right now, just me. I have a few law clerks and some paralegals.
Mm-hmm. And let's ask, what's your method of attracting clients? I guess it's going to be different for each of you, but I mean, is it mostly sort of like inbound SEO marketing, or is it a lot of cultivation of personal relationships? I mean, what works? What have you found that works? Ron?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Samir and I must have kind of similar vintage, because I would say a lot of where I get clients from are the relationships that I built up over the past 2 decades. Some of the firms that I worked with before, when they have conflicts, they will refer clients to me. We can maybe get into a little bit of detail of what happens when one of the bigger companies wants to hire a small law firm and some of the challenges that we face. But that's one source. I would say, especially with entrepreneurs and startup founders, like, if you develop a good reputation, they will refer other people. They seem to have their own networks that then it becomes a source of new clients. And then probably the other big one is finding some sort of affinity group. So in my case, I had immigrated to Canada in 2004. I lived there about 15 years. And little did I know how, being able to sort of use that dual Canadian American citizen card really became sort of a way to attract Canadian clients. And then my business partner, he's from Brazil, and he's very focused on Brazilian clients. So I would say, as a small firm, you've really got to identify, like, where can you get involved in the community? And I haven't done much of the SEO or any of that yet.
Okay, good to know. All right, Samir, how about you? Where are your clients coming from? What works for you these days?
Yeah, much like Ron, like coming from he came from the Big Four background, I came from like the big firm background. It's like a tale of 2 universes almost, in terms of, your marketing methods in either arena. Like, I would say, I'll start with like the big firm, or kind of maybe the higher volume corporate clientele, which I don't have right now. It's kind of by choice, but also because I don't have the size to support it, right? But I am certainly still involved in kind of all the kind of marketing endeavors that go there. And that's like Ron said, it's a function of the relationships that I've built up over the last 18 years or so. Within high volume immigration, I would say it's very relationship based. You need to spend a lot of time getting to know the decision makers within companies that are the ones that choose immigration firms. And they often do so through the RFP, the request for proposal, RFI, RFQ, they have different names. Through that process. And the way to do that is to join their industry organizations. HR groups within companies generally have global mobility departments, especially if they're large enough to support it. And those are the departments that house immigration along with tax and relocation. And so they have these organizations that you join, you can speak at, you network, you get to know people. And it's, if that's kind of where you want to go with your employment-based immigration practice, that's what you have to do. It's almost, I would say, like 90% relationship based, and kind of what their perception is of you as an attorney and of your firm and the quality of it. So like, it'll be rocky in the beginning, but you start building up one client and then you do well there, and then word will spread within these organizations about you. And that's how you start getting referrals to either, win the client through a pitch or have to go through the formal RFP process. So that's like the higher volume side of things. For me, I made the conscious choice like I really wanted to get back to kind of like the nuts and bolts of immigration, and I really enjoy working with smaller, quote unquote, smaller companies and individuals in the employment-based context. And so that was hard because when I left Pro, like they're mostly high volume, so I kind of had to start over there. And I think it was mostly just referrals in the beginning. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but that's what I did as I kind of try to find my footing, having started my own firm and just doing really good work. I did benefit from the relationships that I built, from the prior my prior experience. I would say like the first thing that I did was really, really helpful. Was not even thinking about like, how am I getting clients in the door? I think Ron alluded to this too. What kind of clients do I want to get in the door, right? And I think that's the first step, because otherwise you're just kind of, whatever efforts you kind of invest in, they're going to be like all over the place. There's not going to be a real strategy. It's going to be confused and it's going to be less effective. And so what I did was I kind of figured out, okay, how am I going to kind of find my niche within business immigration, right? And business immigration is already a niche, but even within the field, there are so many different sub niches, as you probably know, right, that you can kind of work in. And that's what I'd recommend is, what is your sub niche, right? Because then you're going to have the most, you'll be the most effective kind of marketing within that area because you feel the most passionate about it, right? So the way that I figured that out, I figured out, okay, the Venn diagram, right? What is the intersection of what am I good at? Like what part of business immigration am I good at? What part do I like? And what part really resonates with my personal values and my mission, right? Whatever that is. And it doesn't even have to be like your immigration mission. It's just your life mission. Like, what are your kind of life values, right? You find the intersection of those three things, and that'll help inform kind of what your niche is, right? Within business immigration. And then when you start marketing, whatever techniques you use, like it'll really come through, like, like your efforts will resonate, and they'll stand out and they'll appear more effective, just louder, just because you truly believe in kind of what you're doing. As far as like what I'm doing for marketing, it's, working on speaking engagements, I think is huge, kind of finding the organizations that need to hear your voice and getting out in front of them, doing like AMAs, or doing town halls, things like that, getting people to like hear you. I think YouTube videos would be huge in that way as well, especially if you're marketing more towards individuals, right, as opposed to companies. And then I'd say LinkedIn. LinkedIn is incredible for kind of B2B marketing. B2B marketing is just, personal branding, but on the corporate context. And, getting your name out there and having a voice that's consistent with kind of what I talked about earlier, like what is your niche? What do you feel strongly about? Then you start kind of posting about things that are interesting rather than here's the new update in law, right? You want to stand out on LinkedIn. And I feel like once you figure out what your niche is and you start posting about that kind of stuff on LinkedIn, you start getting a following. And I've certainly gotten clients from using that tool.
Mm-hmm. And that when you mentioned that, when you go to these industry groups, they want to sort of get a sense of who you are as an attorney, and what do you think are the most important things, both of you guys, in terms of how you present yourself? I mean, let's drill down on that a little bit. And that's also going to get into Ron's point about when they want to, if a corporate client wants to hire a smaller law firm, what are some of the considerations? And we can also talk about what's going to be in the request for information that they might send out. Let's sort of drill down on these.
Yeah, and Samir, if I can jump in and build off your last point, I think both of us had the opportunity when we decided to start our own firms to kind of slow down for a minute and figure out like what was most important to us, that Venn diagram that you were referring to. And for me, a lot of it was channeling the frustration that I heard from the employees of the big corporate accounts and trying to figure out how could I provide a service that would be more beneficial to them and more accessible to them. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. The initial model that I was planning to sort of have the focus of the firm didn't end up taking flight, as it were, but it did really get me into this identity of user experience, focus on the client. I had seen so many both service models and technology tools that were really inwardly focused on the law firm. And so I've been very purposeful about whatever technology I use or whatever culture we're going to create at the firm, it has to be focused on the client. And I think that's probably more, I talk more about that and how technology can aid but not replace the human face. I talk more about that than I do about specifics of, you know, perm or O1 visa or something like that. And I think forming that connection, as Samir said, the LinkedIn identity is invaluable, because people may not necessarily come to me directly, but they can see what I'm about through my LinkedIn posts in a much more meaningful way than if I just were posting informative articles about, you know, the H-1B second round lottery or something like that.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Samir? What are you, let's drill down on what are they looking for, and these RFIs that you talked about, what kind of questions do they ask?
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of depends. I mean, first of all, 100% agree with everything Ron said. It kind of depends on like who you're talking about specifically, right?
Okay.
So let's start with like the higher volume clients. So at the end of the day, who are your clients going to be? They're going to be in HR for the most part, right? They are tasked with the responsibility of managing their corporate immigration program. When things go right, they get no credit. When things go wrong, they get blamed by their supervisors. So what they are most concerned about is working with a firm that they know can handle whatever issues that they personally have or they can individually have as a company. If they're super high volume, they want to see a company or a law firm that's big enough to support their, right? Like the number one thing they're looking for is, who do I feel least fearful going to, right? Who do I feel is going to support me the most? Because I know that my head's probably on the chopping block when it comes to like, if anything goes wrong. So I feel like trust is like, across clients, they want that, but it manifests in different ways, right? What does it mean to different clients? And I think the idea that you are a really good lawyer, I think that means less. I mean, it's important, but it's not the first thing they look for. Like they want to know that you just had really good results, right? And results can be different than being a good lawyer. It's being a good, it includes being a good lawyer. It's being a good business partner, right? It's being a good advisor. It's making your clients look good, right? To their supervisors. And so kind of having that business savvy and dealing with your clients really, really helps kind of at the high volume level. The other things they look for, I would say are, I mean, technology is in every request for information proposal, whether or not it's a priority. I think it's probably a mandate across companies that they look for that. And, we in immigration, like we have to understand that the high volume companies like HRs are using really sophisticated kind of modern tools, their HR information systems, their talent acquisition and talent management systems, things like that. And for the most part, I would say in immigration, like we don't necessarily measure up in kind of like the tools that we have, right? So sometimes, that can be an issue. Like if you're not kind of coming in with a tool that they feel is modern, has a great kind of user experience, makes their employees' lives easier, and gives them access to their immigration data, plus exposure and kind of visibility into where a case is and where communications are, right? And so I'd say from a high volume perspective, it's that. I would say kind of if you're looking at a smaller company, like maybe a startup or something like that, it's more about like how do you fit with the company, right? Are you somebody, in my opinion, I think what works for us is that like we don't come in kind of like as a lawyer per se, we kind of come in as an advisor, and we try to make things as easy for them as possible, for our clients as possible, right? So we try to speak in a way that gives them, security, makes them feel good, but also what they can understand what we're saying, right? So we don't speak in legalese. We try to take as much off their plate as possible and make life easier for them. Because if you're at a smaller company and you're an HR or you're CEO, you're wearing 100 different hats. And so to have somebody come in and just take stuff off your plate and handle it is super attractive.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about the technology. I mean, what sort of systems would you really need in your office to satisfy some of these requirements? I mean, you certainly just having a very basic system may not do it. What will be the essentials?
I'll go first, and interested to hear what Ron says too. The essentials would be well, depending on, once again, on the company, but if let's say that you're talking about a high volume company,
Mm-hmm.
the essentials would be an immigration case management platform or system that provides, visibility, as much visibility as possible to your corporate clients, and as much kind of a modern experience to their employees as possible. And when I say a modern experience, I mean, think of all the systems that we use nowadays to apply for, mortgages or do this, or I don't know, maybe that's not a great example, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like the employees, especially the employees that are mostly tech-based, are so used to really modern systems and ease of use and uploading documents and kind of where am I at with this, and to the extent that they can get that within an immigration case management system, that would be super important. I focus a lot more kind of on the outwardly facing, kind of what the clients need. But there's so much more, and I'm just interested in kind of hear what Ron, has to say on this about kind of like the internal, how to be more efficient, as a law firm, because that's really, really important too, especially as you get to higher volume. I think the companies just expect that you got that part handled. Like they don't necessarily ask too much about that. And so it's kind of like, you don't get a lot of credit for being good at it, but it's super important to be good at it. And I'd be interested to hear what kind of Ron says on that note.
Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just to build on, maybe to sort of slice it up differently, I think you have to think about what does the client need to be able to communicate with you, and then what do you need to be able to provide the information to the client? I mean, it sounds like kind of the same thing, but to break it down a little bit further, some of the things that Samir was talking about, if you look at for me, the gold standard really is Amazon and FedEx. Those are the two things I think about all the time. And by the way, as a business unit of FedEx, I can't stand their website, but if I'm tracking a package, I love the way that I can see like every step it's taken. I can see the progress. If something gets delayed for whatever reason, they give the updates. Amazon does a similar thing where they have the progress bar. But those are all things that, for whatever reason, are not readily available. I mean, I've looked at every immigration software out there, and for some, I think a big part of the problem is that they depend too much on a support team that a lot of the smaller immigration firms just don't have to keep all that data updated. And where I'm a bit all over the place with this answer, but when you start dealing with the really big clients or even the small clients, there's sort of different reasons why this is important. You have to be able to track the data, because as business immigration lawyers, one of the best ways to generate new business is to tell people that their status is expiring, or to tell people now is a good time to start your green card. And so suddenly, something that was maybe $2,000 or $3,000 case to begin with can eventually grow into $10,000 or $15,000 by the time you're done with the green card, or maybe even more. And so if you don't have that data, even for the individual clients, if you don't have a way to run a report to look at expiration dates, to track visa max dates for people on H and L visas, those are the behind the scenes things, as well as like the financial side of it. I mean, there's all kinds of operational things that you have to have a system. And I think Samir and I are very fortunate that we had this experience Samir is a managing partner. In the roles that I had, I was very involved in financial management as well. You're not going to, how do I want to say it? That you can't really shortcut that. Like once you start working with corporate clients, they are going to expect that you have a professional invoicing system, that if, for example, an $85 biometrics fee gets returned to you, that you have a way to issue a credit note and keep track of it. There's all sorts of little things that go beyond just filing a case. And I got a bit off my main point, which I really wanted to make, which is that I would say the number one rule of case management software is don't ask the client for something you already have. That is the thing that irritates clients the most. Didn't I already give this to you? Don't you already have that in your system? And so that's several sort of random thoughts.
And sorry, James, I would jump in because Ron reminded me of something kind of related to that, but also to marketing. I feel like the law firms that do the best marketing are often, or the lawyers that do the best marketing, often not necessarily the ones that are out and about speaking and kind of building relationships that they just do. They're just on top of their stuff, you know, day in, day out. They're consistent. They are responsive. They build the trust of their clients, right? They're organized. They're way on top of deadlines, and they've shown the companies that they can be trusted and they can be responsible, you know, consistently over a long period of time and across companies. Because what happens is HRs, they change jobs, right? And then like they want to work with somebody they know, is good. And so in that case, they'll just kind of bring you on, right? Because they had that experience with you. So I wanted to make that point. The second point that Ron made that was really good was like, you're only as good as the data that you enter, no matter what system that you have. Like you have to have a team that is trained well and has been managed well to check the box off, you know, when they happen, you know, and FedEx, their employees are trained really well. Amazon, you know, it all works well because their employees know how to update the system, you know, as soon as something happens in real time. DoorDash, you know, that kind of thing. And so our staff needs to be able to do that as well.
I guess I wanted to sort of get a little bit more into what is going to be different in terms of how you accomplish your billing, your invoicing, and updating the client and case status in, once you start dealing with corporate clients, than it would be in dealing with individual clients. I mean, if we could sort of like get to some of those essential differences.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Ron, real quick. I mean, from my perspective, you have to have flexibility in your invoicing procedure. I would say, number one, you might have to be able to have the capacity to advance filing fees to your companies rather than wait for a check for them for every single process for the filing fee. Because especially if you're working at a high volume, you can't wait. You can't wait to file a transfer for, your client's accounting system to issue you a check, right? And so I think if you're able to do that, like that's what most law firms are doing nowadays, and I think that's super important. Like I said, flexibility in invoicing, like they want invoices to look a certain way so that they can kind of be compatible with their AP process, right? Being flexible with not being paid right away, and kind of understanding the difference between, net 30, 60, 90 kind of payment terms and how to negotiate that kind of going in. How long can you go without being paid for a certain process? Because a lot of times you just don't have leverage over that. Companies do what they do. This is how long they take to pay. And they're not going to change it just for one firm when another firm is able to be okay, with whatever terms that they're comfortable with. So those are like some of the few things that pop into mind for me.
Are you using, are you doing mostly flat fees for these? Do you have sort of everything broken down to flat?
Yeah, everything's flat. And by the way, that's a huge component of the RFP process, right? Like you know that you're going to get your fee schedule, your flat fee schedule for every process, H's, L's, perms, AOS, all that stuff, compared to every other firm that's going to be, in the RFP, right? And they're going to look at it, not like they're not going to take into account, why your fees may be higher than the other firm, because maybe you provide more service and you add more goodies into your day-to-day, service. They're literally going to be, evaluated by, let's say, a procurement, person who works in the procurement department, who knows very little about immigration, right? And will want to know why your firm charges $200 more than another firm. Let's forget about the fact that the government filing fees are several $1,000s and really renders these differences meaningless, but that's kind of what they're looking for. And so, yeah, it is all flat fees. You have to be good at negotiating them. And I think kind of staying true to, your economics as a firm and not feeling pressured to lower your fees too much, because, once again, it goes back to finding like the right kind of clients for you. Like the right kind of clients for you are the ones that value you and are okay paying your fees. Because they like your service, right? And so, so I'm sorry that I think your question was more about flat fees and stuff. I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Well, that's okay. And for Ron also, how about are you sort of doing the work first and then invoicing them? Do you have a reason to utilize the trust account? Just some of these details.
Ooh, that's a. I don't want to answer that question. So. Yeah, I mean, much the same. I will just add a couple of quick things, and then I'll get to the trust question. One is you definitely have to have some system to keep track of expenses. So not just the filing fees, right? There's FedEx fees or whatever courier you're using. there's education evaluations, translations, advertising costs. And all of these are things that with the bigger corporate clients, I would kind of add a nuance to what Samir said. They are expecting that you have the cash flow to support them and that things aren't just going to grind to a halt until you receive payment. However, I think they also are very used to a partnership and you have to be able to have a conversation with them. And so, for example, with one of our biggest clients, when they came in, we got them to agree that their normal payment terms are net 90, which sounds really scary, but it's actually better than some of our other the biggest corporate clients are the slowest payers. I'm just going to tell you that right now. The individuals, like, they want you to work on their case. That money's in your bank account the next day and they're emailing you saying, where's my application? But with this client, net 90 on the legal fees, but we got them to agree that they would be net 30 on the expenses. And so, and they also agree that basically and this is true for all of our clients, so we issue the invoice upon initiation. So whatever the payment terms are, they start as of the day they've either signed the engagement letter or gone through the initiation process. Trust accounting, I feel like this is an area that I'm not really competent to speak on. Initially, I thought I was going to be the best at having trust and operating accounts. But because we have so many clients that don't actually pay us until either after the filing or on the day of the filing, what we've done in California, they allow us to put a clause in our engagement letters that gives the client, basically puts the client on notice that you're going to have them pay directly into the operating account. They have the option to opt out of that and have you put it in trust. So far, nobody's asked for that. If they did, then we would just tell them that's great, but it just means we won't file until the money shows up there. But I think for corporate clients, like, you're going to look really amateur if you're asking them to write the filing fee checks or, I don't know, send you money orders even. Like, that's just not the way they're used to working.
Okay, good to know. How about a little bit about the communication with the clients? Do they expect to do everything through the portal? Do you get everything? Do you get a lot through email? Are phone calls frequently used?
Yeah, all of the above.
Okay.
This is, I didn't really comment too much on the RFP process, but as Samir said, it's always going to include a technology component. They're always going to want to see a demo of your technology. Once they've signed up, it's really like whatever the people that are managing the cases on the client side, what is it that they feel most comfortable with? And so, we had set up a really nice way for clients to initiate cases through the portal of the practice management software we use. Nobody uses it though. They all just email us, can you start this? Oftentimes it's because they don't know what they're starting, or they want you to do an initial call to do an assessment. So that's a big part of it. It's just being aware of what actually works, not necessarily what the RFP said. And then final point is that I think you have to be prepared for the when it's more than just a one-off corporate client, to set up recurring calls, whether it be weekly, monthly, bi-weekly. Even if they don't ask for it, you should be offering it, because that's how you keep that relationship strong. If they don't hear from you, they're going to meet somebody else at a conference, and trust me, nobody's loyal. So
good to know. Good to know. Samir, you want to add on the communication, anything?
Yeah, no, those weekly, or just depending on the size of the company, really, whether it's weekly, bi-monthly, monthly, those calls are super important. And 100% agree that you should be doing them, no matter what. Like, if you have a company with 5 foreign nationals, do a monthly call. It helps you check in with the company, gives you FaceTime. FaceTime is the most important thing, in addition to being a good service provider, when it comes to keeping your clients, as Ron mentioned. And that's just another form of marketing. So I think that's huge. I think they all, in terms of corporate clients, expect that you have a newsletter of some sort that's going out to their HR team and to all their employees. that updates them to the kind of latest changes, kind of almost in real time to the change happening, because they're also getting newsletters from large firms that have like the kind of the staff to be able to kind of pump those out, and so you may not necessarily have to kind of compete with the timing of the newsletters of the big firms, but at least you want to be able to show that you have a system that's pushing information out to everybody, keeping everybody engaged and educated about immigration and what's happening, because it reflects on kind of the perception of how engaged and educated you are as a lawyer and as a firm. So, and in terms of just day-to-day communication, 100% agree. It's still mostly email. I mean, even the employees of the companies, they like to email, they like to call. Sometimes they want to show up to the office. To them, it's super stressful. They come from cultures often where face-to-face communication is way more effective than email or phone calls. And so, I would suggest even doing like, Zoom. I mean, COVID was great for this. And in the kind of days before COVID, we would have to kind of go on site to do like, all employee presentations and stuff. So the idea of doing like immigration town halls or whatever for employees via Zoom is so much more, common now. And I think we can kind of probably continue with that process even past COVID, if that ever happens. And so like having more of those kind of where you're just kind of putting yourself out there, and immigration is so personal to each employee. Like you can put out the news, you can put out the information, but how does it apply to their lives, right? It applies to their lives in very specific ways and different from almost every other employee. And so to be able to ask the questions is huge, and they don't often get the opportunity day to day. So giving them a forum to ask their questions and get them answered, I think would be super helpful.
Let's I want to talk about conflicts of interest. That's a really important topic, and what let's get into it. I mean, conflicts of interest with lawyers, there are current conflicts, there are conflicts with previous clients. I mean, it's going to be different in the employment-based context. I mean, we're used to in immigration law, our classic example is, you have a simple family-based case and, the husband and the wife aren't getting along. But I mean, let's talk about in the employment-based context, what sorts of conflicts emerge and what precautions do you have to take to put into place to avoid conflicts, or if you detect a potential or an actual conflict to deal with it, what are the essential safeguards?
I'll jump in, Samir.
Sure.
And I also just want to quickly say, James, that the DocketWise newsletter is one of the best that's out there. So if anybody's watching and not signed up, I highly encourage it.
Thank you.
So I think for me, what comes to mind isn't so much the like Google versus Apple type of conflict. I mean, if we have that problem, that would be amazing, I guess. But it's more what I consider conflict is a situation where the employee comes to you and wants to know how they can switch employers, and how do you, if fundamentally it's the company that's engaged the law firm to serve the company, and kind of a byproduct of that is that the employee gets their visa, you don't want to be in a position where you have information that could be detrimental to the company. And so I would say it's something that we're honestly still working on, but mainly it's a training issue for our team, where at the very beginning, I stress to them that, hey, like if you ever get onto a phone call and the person starts with the phrase, there's something I need to tell you, before you let them tell you anything, cut them off and say, I need to remind you that I'm engaged by your employer. And if anything you tell me, I might have an obligation to let them know if it could go against them. That's probably what I see. There's some things written into our engagement letters, but frankly, I don't think that that's something that we could really rely on 100%. I think it's more about the communication piece, like at the very beginning, trying to do like an actual call and not have everything by email. In fact, we almost never do real calls. Almost everything is Zoom or Teams. And the video, I think, helps tremendously to form the relationship and to communicate some of these broader concepts about what's the responsibility of the company, what's the responsibility of the employee, and what's the law firm's responsibility.
Well, Ron, now, and Samir, you can obviously answer too, but I mean, do you always consider 100% that your total loyalty is to the employer? I mean, there used to be this talk of, at what point is it joint representation? At what point is there a golden mean? Cyrus Mehta, you wrote an article a long time about the golden mean in employment-based immigration. I never 100% got at what he was driving at there, but let's talk about that a little bit.
Thank you for admitting that, because I'm with you. Just quickly, and then let Samir talk. I don't think it's as black and white as I was making it sound. It's more just to put the employee on notice that before they tell you anything, we may have to share. Usually it's not so much that we share, but then I would, if they said something, I would probably tell them, like, it's more frankly in the arrest side of things, where they've gotten arrested and they don't know what to do, that I'll say to them, look, like, you need to let the employer know, because this could impact your visa. And I give them an opportunity to do that on their own. But anyway, Samir, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I think, these are all important considerations. I would also probably throw in, talk to the, when it comes to arrests and it comes to just general, examples that don't happen very often, honestly, but like, say somebody wants to leave the company, and so how do I do that? Talk to the company first, like, just to kind of get a sense of like how they feel about, you helping the employee in that situation, because it can also backfire if you view it as somebody who's not helpful to their employees. That may be contrary to the company culture, right? Where they kind of just help their employees with everything, right? That could be the culture of some companies, whereas others may be like, no, don't tell them anything. And so you just want to be cognizant of, maybe what the company, would desire you to say or not to say in that situation. Make sure, as Ron said, that your engagement agreement with the company, contains a kind of dual representation clause that protects you, right, as a law firm.
But what would that What would that look like?
So it's, there's not one right answer to that. I think what we typically use is just a notice to the employer that immigration is quote unquote dual representation, whatever that means. And I've spent hours and hours thinking about this, because, quite honestly, and I don't understand Cyrus's article either, although I don't understand a lot of what Cyrus says, which is why I love him. He's so educational, and I learned a lot from him. But it's not just like, okay, we can't help you with, X, Y, and Z, right? Like, we have duties as lawyers to provide, zealous and effective advocacy, right? And there's no way that I would say, theoretically, any law firm gives the level of advice to the company that they do to each of the individual employees. Like, it just doesn't happen, right? So in almost every case, especially as companies get bigger, right? The employees are getting much less of you than the companies are getting. And that's just the way it is. Nobody's fault, it's just the way the system is set up, right? And so I think at the very least, just protect yourself with a clause that we just put the company on notice that, immigration is dual representation. We are doing X, Y, and Z for the employees. They do have questions about, their personal lives that often don't conflict with the company, but if they do, we'll be sure to notify you, and then if necessary, refer the employee out to a different law firm, right? If that's what you want, or just something kind of in writing to show that you've addressed that. I've never seen that actually come up as an issue between companies and law firms, at least in my experience. Also, let the employees know. So whether or not you build that into your online questionnaire, they need to check off on a box stating that they also understand that, right? So that you have a record that you've advised the employees as such.
Do you ever see this situation? First of all, two questions. Do you ever provide a memorandum to the employees letting them know? I mean, because they don't see the engagement letter. So
I would say just a short statement, like let's say an online questionnaire, and have them check it off, make it a mandatory check off that they have to, that they understand that, however this, this clause applies to them, you just kind of, have that language in there. And I think that's good enough. And most employees know. Like, I've talked to enough employees where they realize who's paying the bills here, right? And so, but just to have something in writing to protect yourself, I think, is advisable.
How about in the adjustment of status situation, when you get to the adjustment phase, have you seen where the employee wants to retain separate counsel for the adjustment phase, or have a separate counsel go to the interview with them? Has that come up? Or?
It only really, for me, I'm interested to hear what Ron says, but it's often just a matter of dollars. Like, they would rather their company counsel handle it if the company's going to pay for it. And most companies, at least, Silicon Valley area, kind of California and tech will pay for the AOS, right? In addition to the I-140 and obviously the perm. And so the employee will invariably choose that option so that they don't have to pay for the fees.
But how about going to the interview? Would you go to the interview? Okay.
So, the companies generally don't pay for that unless there's like a compelling business need for that to happen, or depending on who, like if it's an executive or something, then maybe they will. But if the employee agrees to pay, then yeah, we often do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have a separate agreement for that to cover that representation. Yeah.
Okay. Ron?
Yeah, I would just one thing that I would add is that we've had a couple of cases over the past year or so where somebody that we were helping do perm-based green card went off and hired their own lawyer to do a national interest waiver. And a lot of that is frankly driven by wanting their spouse to get work permission so that they can file the AOS concurrently with the I-140 petition. To be honest, I was sort of a little bit disappointed that they hadn't worked with us on the national interest waiver petition, but I think probably since the employee was paying their own money, maybe they felt like they wanted to have more control over it. But otherwise, everything that Samir said is the same with our practice.
And I would say the same holds with EB1s. If they feel, maybe the company won't support the EB1, it's another form of kind of a self-sponsored, benefit that the employees can pay for. And so they often go to different attorneys to get that done.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk about sort of networking in the immigration lawyer community in terms of finding mentorship, or if you have some immigration experience or you've been in other aspects of it, but you want to get into the employment-based area, where can you go to sort of find mentors and maybe have people share templates or just advise you and communicate with colleagues?
I think there's lots of opportunities. One is, I would say, make sure that you're a member of AILA, that you're a member of the local chapter. Don't be shy about reaching out to people and asking if they'll do a coffee or even a virtual coffee. Make sure if you do that you're interested in them, that you're not going to them to ask for a job. People don't like that, but they like the other one where they get to talk about themselves. There's also a number of groups on Facebook, on WhatsApp of immigration lawyers that I would say seek those out and join them. You'll get to meet people pretty quickly. LinkedIn is another one. And again, I think you just have to reach out to people, find a lawyer that you find that you have some affinity with, like their posts, and just reach out and say, hey, I'd like to get to know more about your career path and how you got to where you are.
All right. Great advice, guys. I really appreciate both of you being here. It's been really informative. Once again, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.